The house was the last thing left standing on that stretch of County Road 16. A hollow carcass of wood and silence. Rain whispered through its ribs, the kind that falls without mercy, slow and endless, as though the sky itself could not bear to keep its grief. The air smelled of rust and old salt, the ghost of something once alive lingering in the damp. A single window bled faint yellow light from the investigator's flashlight, trembling across warped floorboards and peeling wallpaper, where flowers had long forgotten their color. He paused by the doorway, where a windless curtain shifted as though breathing. Every step he took felt rehearsed, familiar, like walking into a dream he'd tried to forget. The room spoke in echoes. The soft groan of the ceiling, the sigh of dust lifting from the floor. His name was Thomas Ward, and in the silence, the case was whispering his own guilt back at him. He'd read the old files 100 times. The missing girl, Lila Morrow, 16, vanished after the Harvest Fair of 1985. Blonde hair, grey eyes, like rain about to fall, the report had said. She was last seen near this very house before it went cold, before the town turned the page. But tonight, 37 years later, something had stirred the past, and Thomas could feel it breathing again, outside. The forest leaned close, black branches swaying like a jury in deliberation. Inside, every sound carried weight, his heartbeat, the click of his pen, the faint scratch of wind fingering the cracked glass. He could feel her here, not as memory, not as spirit, but as something unresolved. The kind of truth that never leaves, only decays. He crouched by a water-stained corner, where the boards seemed darker, softer. Beneath the rot, a faint outline of something circular. He hesitated. The silence deepened, stretching like an open wound. 2. Old Disappearance resurfaces after discovery of symbolic object. The locket was small enough to fit in his palm, its silver tarnished to the color of ash. Inside, the photograph was barely there, a young girl's face half erased by time, but her eyes remained, grey, unflinching. Watching him, Thomas turned it under the flashlight, the beam trembling. The initials on the back LM might as well have been carved into his own skin. For years, her case had been the story that defined him, the one that ruined sleep and hollowed the heart. He'd been a rookie then, too eager, too sure that justice was a straight road. But he'd missed something. He always knew he had. Outside, the rain thickened, smearing the world into watercolor shadows. He could see his reflection in the cracked mirror above the mantel, pale, sleepless, older than he remembered. Behind that reflection, a shadow seemed to breathe. He turned quickly, flashlight cutting across empty air. There was no one. Only the locket, open on the floor like a wound refusing to close. He called the evidence team. Voice steady, though his hand wasn't. They would come in the morning. For now, the night was his alone. He pocketed the locket, feeling the chill of it seep into his bones in the silence. Memory unspooled the voice of Lila's mother crying in the precinct. The pale blue ribbon she'd worn that night, the way the town turned its eyes away. He remembered walking these same woods back then, hearing laughter that wasn't there. And now, 3 decades later, it had returned, not laughter this time, but a whisper. "You never left me, did you?" He froze. The words were not sound but thought, soft, intrusive, as though borrowed from somewhere beneath his ribs. He blinked hard, focused on the window. Only the rain moved. But the whisper had weight, a shape, and it settled deep behind his heart. 3. Investigator shows personal involvement. Mixing duty with obsession's leap had become a form of interrogation. Every time Thomas closed his eyes, the house reassembled itself, boards snapping, air tightening, that same whisper threading through the dark. He'd begun to speak her name aloud, as if it could anchor him. But Lila's name only deepened the silence. At the precinct, the younger officers avoided his gaze. They knew the story, how he'd once been a suspect himself. How he'd found the missing girl's hair ribbon in his own evidence locker 30 years ago, filed by mistake or fate. He'd cleared his name, but never his conscience. The locket sat on his desk now, sealed in plastic, but still somehow alive. When he leaned close, he swore he could smell rain on it, old, metallic, like the night she disappeared. He drove to the outskirts that evening, where the old carnival ground had been swallowed by weeds. The Ferris wheel was gone, but its ghost lingered in the air, a slow, rusted creak that had no source. He stood there until twilight drained the sky, waiting for something he couldn't name. A figure appeared then, framed by the last light. A woman in a long coat, face half hidden. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Her voice was thin, almost familiar. "Neither should you," he answered. For a moment, silence pressed between them. Then she looked at the locket in his hand, her eyes tightening. "You kept it," she whispered. "All these years." Thomas blinked, unsure if he'd heard her right. You knew, Lila." But she was already turning away, swallowed by the trees. Her footsteps made no sound. Back in the car, his hands trembled on the steering wheel. The world outside the windshield looked wrong, too still, as if holding its breath. He realized then that he wasn't chasing the truth anymore. He was being led back to it, step by step, like a confession. In the glove box lay the old case file, edges curled with age. On the first page, beneath her photograph, someone had underlined a single word in red ink: home. Thomas looked up. The headlights caught the dirt road ahead, winding back toward County Road 16. Toward the house, he started. The engine morning arrived without color, a thin sheet of light that felt more like exhaustion than daybreak. The town responded in small, brittle movements, blinds lifting, a dog's leash snapping taut, coffee pouring into cracked mugs. Thomas drove through it like a shadow pacing alongside the gutter, returning to the places where memory had left thumbprints. Grief here was a local dialect. Everyone spoke it with their eyes. There were only 3 people he let into the radius of this case, and each of them carried a wound that made the investigation feel less like work and more like a vigil. The first was Lila Morrow, Lila's older sister, who'd been 19 in 1985, and is now a woman with winter in her hair. She ran the thrift store on Maple, stitching the town's discarded lives into something usable. When Thomas crossed her doorway, a bell rang like a distant bicycle. The room was full of faded dresses and the iron scent of old zippers. Eloise looked up, and for a moment he saw Lila, not in the face, but in the pause before words. "You always come when it rains," she said, voice low, as if words might bruise. Her eyes caught the evidence bag in his hand, the locket's dull oval pressed against plastic. She didn't reach for it. She simply bowed her head, and the air grew heavier. "I found it in the old house," Thomas said. "The house found you," Eloise murmured, then looked past him toward the window where the day shivered. Lila loved thunderstorms. She said they cleaned the sky's conscience, a breath, a steadiness. Did you ever tell her mother that? You never tell mothers the small things. You keep the small things for yourself. He wanted to answer. Instead, he listened to the bell hush itself. The second was Pastor Harlan, who kept his church unlocked even at night, a sanctuary for the sleepless. The sanctuary had a warped aisle and a cross that tilted just enough to suggest the weight truth imposes on wood. The pastor was a thin man with rope-veined hands, and he remembered the harvest fair like a hymn he regretted singing. People confess to the story they can survive, he told Thomas in a pew-side whisper. Back then, the town needed a villain to stay whole. We named everyone who fit the shadows. His glance flicked up, measuring Thomas. Including you. I was cleared, Thomas said. But it sounded like an apology. There's cleared, Harlan said. And there's clean. He touched the locket through the bag, reverent as if blessing a relic. Does it still feel cold? Yes. Then it's still telling the truth about something. The third circle was the smallest. The closest, Marion Ward, Thomas's ex-wife, who had learned years ago that the case slept in their bed and woke up in their coffee. She lived now in a second-floor apartment above the pharmacy, a place that smelled of talc and old wood. Marion didn't offer him a chair. She offered him her stillness, which was rarer. She looked at the fatigue braided into his features and said, almost kindly, "You don't know how to live without her, do you?" "She was a child," he said. "So were you," Marion answered, the softness in her tone making the words hurt more. "You were a boy with a badge too big for your coat, and you saw a girl who looked like a promise. Every promise you've made since has been to her. Did that break us?" he asked, "or fix me?" Marion stood at the window, watching the parking lot below where two teenagers shared a cigarette in a posture of borrowed adulthood. Both, that's the trick this town plays. It gives and it takes with the same hand. They were the three who knew the pressure of the case, like weather in their bones, who threaded Thomas back to the person he had been in 1985, and the person the case insisted he'd become now. In their presence, facts didn't matter as much as the angle of silence. What they remembered, what they regretted, what they refused to say, those were the shapes the investigation took. 6. Twist questions investigators' perception. Blurring truth and delusion, the house waited, the way an unasked question waits. Patient, certain, cruel. Thomas brought Pastor Harlan with him at dusk, a second witness to whatever mirror might be coaxed to speak. The pastor carried a flashlight and a Bible he didn't open. "We are not here to absolve," he said, stepping over the threshold. "We are here to attend." Inside, their beams drifted over weathered wallpaper, over the corner where the locket had been nested in rot. The air tightened, the way rooms do when memory is trying to reform. Thomas read the diary line aloud. "If I go in alone, it will show me who loved me enough to stop me." The words seemed to change the temperature, dragging a coolness out of the walls. "Listen," Harlan whispered, at first. Thomas heard nothing but his pulse in his ears. Then faint, peripheral, the friction of denim against wood. The almost sound of someone shifting weight on a board, careful not to complain. He swung his light toward the hall, empty. He stepped forward, and the board didn't speak, as if it knew him and offered the mercy of silence. "Show yourself," he said, and hated the cliché as it left him. He wasn't one for theater, but the room felt staged, and he had entered on cue. A voice answered from the doorway, threadbare as the house itself. "I told you not to come alone." The woman from the carnival ground, the long coat, the face half hidden, stepped from shadow, and the light found her completely this time. "Eloise?" "No." "Marion?" "No." She was neither and both, an amalgam of faces that mattered. Her real name arrived in Thomas's mind with the shock of recognition that feels like invention. Anya Lark, a cousin to the brothers. A girl he'd seen in passing in '85 holding a paper cone of cotton candy. Quiet, invisible in the way the frightened learn to be. He had not written her down. He had not remembered her until memory decided to punish the omission. Anya's eyes reflected the beam like water does, giving back more darkness than light. "You were there," she said. "You saw her walk past the fence. You told yourself you had another call." His mouth felt covered with sleep. The memory she offered was not in his files. It skittered, feral, around the margins of what he called truth. Had he turned away? Had he misshelved that moment, the way a man hides the drink he shouldn't have poured? "We were all there," Harlan said, voice a quiet plank. "Speak." Anya looked at the chimney, at the place where smoke would be if the house were the kind of house that welcomed heat. Benny and Saul were mean in the common way. They wanted what boys want when no one tells them what wanting costs. But she walked past them. Anya touched the doorframe as if counting time. She came here to meet someone who promised he could make her future smaller, so it would fit in the town. The accusation found Thomas's throat before his name did. Who Anya's gaze did not move to him so much as enter him, as though the light were shining from his skull outward. "You wore a black watch band with little notches cut into the leather. Not crosses. Notches you cut when you were bored on stakeout." "I saw you," she said simply. "I saw you in the mirror." Thomas felt the floor tilt. In the shoebox photograph, the half-cropped wrist with the patterned band, he had told himself it was a boy's belt flourish. He had told himself a story he could survive. The notches were his habit, a quiet penance engraved in leather. He had been proud of that band once, the way it softened with time, the way it took marks. He had not worn it for years, a superstition he named coincidence. Now it yawned open like a trap he had set for himself decades ago. "You're wrong," he said, and his voice didn't believe him. "You were supposed to stop her," Anya answered. "You were supposed to say, no promises here, only pretending, but you let her walk. Maybe you thought you would circle back. Maybe you thought you had time. She came to tell you she wasn't going to be anyone's secret. She came to choose Sky." Harlan placed a steady hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Not comfort, calibration." "Attend," he whispered again. The room dilated. Thomas felt the fair's music roll in an auditory hallucination he recognized. A carousel tune slowed to an almost human breath. He saw himself in 1985, young and bright and certain of the order of things. He saw Lila pause in the doorway of this house, half-turned, a hesitation like a syllable balancing before sound. He saw his own nod, a reflexive allowance, mistaken by her for permission or safety. He saw how thin the difference is between benevolence and neglect. Truth slid under him like water on tile. Anya's words continued, but they became part of the house's noises, the mutter of old timber, the imagination of rain. He did not know if she spoke of the brothers grabbing and failing, of a chase toward the river, of a fall, of a hand not extended in time. He saw possible scenes strobe, Benny's knife, bright and then absent. Saul's panic. Lila's foot skidding on wet stone. Thomas's breath catching the long second where certainty broke. Why come now? He managed. Anya pulled something from her coat pocket, a strip of leather, cracked, notched, because the town needed an arrest and the truth needed a witness. They're not the same thing. She set the band on the mantel. "I found this in the thrift store. Items tell their stories to those who stopped listening too late." Thomas touched the leather. The notches fit his thumb like old sins. He remembered. He unremembered. He hovered in the tender gap where both are true. Sirens approached, far, then closer, not urgent, ceremonial. The arrest. He understood what the night was arranging without his permission. Benny and Saul Lark. Cuffed at last, the town's appetite for closure fed. He should feel relief. All he felt was the house breathing. Anya stepped back, toward shadow. "Tell your town a story they can carry," she said. "Tell yourself the story that will carry you." She was gone then, and it didn't matter whether she had been there at all. The house held the echo of her absence like a bowl holds the shape of fruit after it's lifted. Harlan's hand remained on his shoulder, a human hinge between delusion and confession. "You saw what you needed," the pastor said gently. "What if what I needed was untrue?" Thomas asked. "Then it will keep you honest," Harlan said. "Untruth makes the best mirror." Thomas stood very still. In that stillness, memory did not become fact. It became penance. Outside, the sirens faded into procedure. Inside, the leather band on the mantel darkened as the room inhaled, exhaled, waited. He felt both the urgency to run and the discipline to remain. The twist, if there was one, was not who did what on which night. It was the realization that he would spend the rest of his life deciding which version of himself to believe. 7. Ending feels haunting and unresolved. Truth brings no peace. The arrest happened at noon the next day. Under a sky so clean it looked laundered. Benny Lark sagged against the cruiser door with the practiced weariness of a man who has rehearsed regret in the mirror. Saul stared at the ground as if words might be down there for the picking. The community turned out in a hush, clusters of people clutching their own versions of vindication. Camera phones rose like a field of metallic flowers. Eloise stood near the curb, her hands empty, her face a map without legend. Pastor Harlan kept to the steps of the church, a silent witness to a ritual that felt less like justice and more like a harvest nobody wanted. Thomas read the charges into the microphone, and the sentences unspooled with the inevitable cadence of a road he'd already speaked up in his sleep. Abduction, assault, involuntary manslaughter, the river deciding finality where the town had failed to. He said Lila's name. The syllables moved through the assembled like a wind. He said the date, October 12th, 1985. The air bristled with the tear of a calendar, finally surrendering a page. Afterward, in the precinct, there were congratulatory hands. A paper cup of coffee he didn't drink. A statement to the press, crafted to give everyone something to hold. Persistence, closure, community, words, like furniture rearranged after a long absence. He signed forms that asked him to certify certainty. The locket sat beside his pen in its plastic sleeve, unchanging. Night returned with a slowness that felt deliberate. He drove alone to the river, to the place where water kept its counsel. The bank was a mess of roots, like fingers clutching the earth. He imagined a girl stepping wrong, a boy's laughter curdling to plea. The split second where a hand could make a bridge between two futures. He imagined it until imagining felt like memory. Until memory felt like a film spliced and spliced again, until the edges couldn't hold. Footsteps approached. Soft, not intending to startle. Eloise, she stood beside him without greeting. For a time they simply listened to the river carry whatever it carried. Do you believe it? She asked finally, voice the barest ripple. I believe the town needed to, he said. And you? Thomas watched a leaf whirl in an eddy that resembled thought. I believe I should have stopped her, he said. The sentence exited him like an old tenant leaving with a suitcase. I believe I thought I had more time. Eloise nodded, as if he had named something she recognized. I keep thinking of her hands. She had beautiful fingers for piano. We could never afford lessons. She taught herself by listening, one note at a time. Imagine that, building a song like a house with no blueprint. Eloise looked at the river as though it might return a chord. Maybe that's why she drew that house. She was trying to hear her way home. They stood until the cold climbed their legs and decided for them. At the car, Eloise touched his sleeve. The arrests will hold, she said. I want them to, but it won't fix the question. Nothing fixes the question. What is the question? He asked, though he knew. Who loved her enough? Eloise said. And when she walked away, leaving the shape of her in the dark for a few moments after she was gone. He drove without choosing a direction and arrived, as he always did. At County Road 16, the house was a darker shadow within the dark. He entered like a trespasser in his own past. The leather band was still on the mantel, the notches visible in the beam as if someone had traced them with a finger. Dipped in dusk, he set the locket beside it and sat on the floor. After a time, his breathing found the house's rhythm, or the house found his. He took the diary page from his pocket. If I go in alone, it will show me who loved me enough to stop me, and placed it between the relics. He imagined the three objects conversing in the language of things, the locket speaking its cold oval truth, the leather band cataloguing absence with each notch, the paper whispering a question only one person could answer. He said her name again, Lila, and the room did not answer. He said his own name like a man introducing himself to a mirror. He did not ask forgiveness. He did not grant it. He let the quiet work on him like rain works on stone, not to erase, but to make legible what had always been there. When he finally rose, the house had softened, or he had. He left the locket where it lay, an act that felt like naming the room after the person it had devoured. He closed the door behind him and stood on the porch where the night air held a thread of cold that smelled like mint and iron. Far off, a train sang a line of metal sorrow. Back in town, windows stitched yellow onto the black. The news would say the cold case was solved, that arrests had brought relief. It would not show the woman on the church steps exhaling a prayer that didn't fit any scripture, or the ex-wife brushing crumbs from an empty plate, or the pastor watching his breath fog as if the soul were practice for winter. It would not show Thomas walking the fine wire between two truths he could not reconcile, that the brothers had done harm, and that he too had left a door unguarded at home. He placed his badge on the kitchen table and turned off the light. In the dark, he could hear the carnival music again, slowed to a human heartbeat. He let it play. He lay down on the floor and stared at the ceiling until it was no longer a ceiling but a river's underside. He thought of a girl teaching herself a song by ear, building a melody that told her which way was forward. He let the melody find him. He did not follow. Dawn approached without trying. In the first fragile light, the leather band on the mantel of the house on County Road 16 would look like a question mark made of small, deliberate cuts. The locket would hold its cold. The diary page would wait for a hand that would never touch it again. The town would dress itself in certainty and walk forward, proud of the weight it could carry. Thomas would rise, drink coffee he could not taste, and go to the station to sign the last form that made the arrests official. He would speak to cameras and say the words people needed. Then he would drive, not to the house or the river, but to the thrift store to buy a cheap upright with 3 good keys and 4 broken ones, and he would set it by the window in his kitchen where the morning pooled. He would press a finger to each key and listen as the broken ones taught him how a song goes on with missing parts. He would not be comforted. He would not be absolved. He would continue. And in the continuing, Lila would remain exactly where she had always been, the precise distance between a promise and a pretend, a house and a mirror, a hand extended and a hand withdrawn. The case was solved. Peace did not arrive. The silence, however, became articulate, a language he could finally speak without hope of being understood.